They laughed when they lifted her off the ground. For cadets, grinning like boys who had never been told no, carried the new girl across the mess hall and slammed her down onto the long wooden lunch table like she was a sack of grain. Trays clattered. Water glasses tipped. A spoon spun in a slow circle near her ear. The entire dining hall froze, 200 uniforms holding their breath, waiting for her to cry, to scream, to beg them to stop. She did none of those things. She lay perfectly still on her back, eyes fixed on the fluorescent lights above her, breathing slow and even. The way someone breathes when they are counting down from 10 and already know what they are going to do when they reach 0. And then she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a scared smile. The kind of smile a person wears when they have already forgiven you for what you don't yet realize you have done. Within 48 hours, those same 4 cadets would be sprinting across a live training field at 2 in the morning, lungs burning, begging the drill sergeant to let them stop. So here is the question I want you to sit with before we continue. Have you ever underestimated someone and lived long enough to regret it? Tell me in the comments, because this story is for you. Her name was Corporal Elena Vasquez, though on the morning she arrived at Fort Bremen Military Academy, no one bothered to learn it. She was 23 years old, 5'4", 120 pounds on a full stomach. And she carried a single green duffel bag over her shoulder as she stepped off the transport bus into the gray October drizzle. What the cadets saw was a small woman with her hair pulled back too tight and a uniform that looked one size too big. What they did not see were the 3 combat tours stitched invisibly into the seams of that uniform, the shrapnel scar that curved along her left hip like a pale comma, or the commendation letter folded inside her breast pocket signed by a 4-star general who had personally requested her transfer to this academy as a leadership instructor in training. She had been sent to Bremen for a simple reason. The Army needed officers who understood that war was no longer won by the strongest man in the room, and Bremen, with its old traditions and its older prejudices, had the highest washout rate of female cadets in the entire training command. Someone upstairs had decided that Elena, who had already led a mixed rifle squad through 2 ambushes in the Hindu Kush, was the right person to quietly change that. She did not announce any of this when she walked through the gates. She did not correct the gate sergeant when he mistook her for a fresh recruit and sent her to the wrong barracks. She simply followed his directions, set her duffel on an empty bunk in a room full of strangers, and began unpacking with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that the loudest voice in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. The other women in the barracks watched her from the corners of their eyes. One of them, a tall cadet named Riley with a southern accent and kind eyes, finally walked over and offered her hand. She told Elena the rules of the place, the unspoken ones, the ones the instructors never said aloud. There were cadets here, Riley warned, who treated new arrivals like targets. There was a group in particular, 4 of them, the sons of colonels and senators, who ran the mess hall like it was their private kingdom. Elena nodded, folded her second shirt into a perfect square, and thanked her for the warning. She did not say that she had met men like that before, in worse places, with worse weapons. She only said, softly, that she hoped they would be kind. And then she went to dinner. The mess hall at Fort Bremen smelled like boiled vegetables and floor wax, and its long wooden tables were arranged in rows under a cathedral of steel beams that echoed every cough, every laugh, every dropped fork. Elena stepped into that echo carrying a tray loaded with meatloaf, green beans, and a carton of milk she did not plan to drink. She had barely taken 3 steps when she felt the atmosphere of the room shift around her, the way air shifts before a storm. 4 cadets rose from a center table. The tallest one, a broad-shouldered young man named Cadet Harrison Brooks, walked toward her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. He asked her, loud enough for everyone to hear, if she was lost. She told him, politely, that she was not. He asked if she knew that this particular mess hall had a tradition, a welcome ceremony for every new cadet. She told him, still politely, that she was not interested. And that was when the other 3 moved. They came at her from the sides, fast, the way young men move when they have practiced being cruel together. One of them kicked her tray out of her hands. Another grabbed her under the arms. A third took her ankles. Harrison laughed and directed them like a conductor, and before Elena had time to decide whether to resist, they had her off the floor and were carrying her through the aisle. She could have broken the wrist of the boy holding her ankles. She had been trained to do it in less than a second. But she made a calculation in that instant. The same kind of calculation she had made in the mountains when she decided not to fire back at a sniper because the muzzle flash would give away her squad's position. A broken wrist now would mean her own discharge by morning. So she let them carry her. She let them lay her down on the table. She let them laugh. She let the mess hall see her smile at the ceiling. And while she smiled, she memorized their faces, their voices, the way each of them carried his weight. The small tells that would tell her later which of them was a coward and which was merely a fool. When they finally stepped back and waited for her to cry, she sat up calmly, swung her legs over the edge of the table, and stepped down onto the floor. She picked up her ruined tray. She walked it to the trash. She walked out of the mess hall without a word. And behind her, Harrison Brooks and his friends exchanged a glance that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Because for the first time since they had arrived at Bremen, they had the vague, cold feeling that they had just made a mistake they did not yet understand. Elena did not report the incident that night. She did not go to the duty officer. She did not write a statement. Instead, she went back to her barracks, washed her face, and wrote 3 pages in the small green notebook she kept in her footlocker. The same kind of notebook every combat leader she had ever respected had also carried. She wrote down the 4 names. She wrote down their body types, their likely strengths, and the weaknesses she had read in the way they moved. She wrote down the faces of the cadets who had watched and done nothing, because those cadets were, in some ways, the more important problem. A bully is a simple thing to correct. A culture that permits bullying is a harder and more serious enemy, and she had been sent to Bremen to fight the second one, not the first. The next morning, before reveille, she walked across the dark parade ground to the administration building and knocked on the door of Colonel Marcus Hayes, the commandant of cadets. Hayes was 61 years old, a Vietnam veteran with a steel plate in his left leg, and he had been expecting her. He stood when she entered and saluted her before she could salute him, a small courtesy between 2 people who knew exactly who and what each other was. She sat down across from him and told him, in 5 short sentences, what had happened in the mess hall. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask for punishment. She asked for one thing only, permission to handle it herself, through the legitimate channels of training, over the course of the next 2 weeks. Hayes studied her for a long moment. Then he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the personnel files of Harrison Brooks and his 3 companions. Their fathers were powerful men. Their futures were, on paper, guaranteed. Hayes told her that 3 female cadets had already washed out of Bremen this year because of the same group, and that none of those young women had ever filed a formal complaint because they had been afraid of what it would cost them. He told her that if she could do what 3 colonels and 2 generals had failed to do, meaning teach those 4 boys the difference between strength and cruelty, he would personally sign her instructor certification the day she finished. Elena closed the folder. She stood. She saluted. She said only, "Yes, sir," and walked out into the rising sun. That afternoon, the roster for the next field training exercise was posted on the barracks board. Cadet Brooks and his 3 friends found their names listed in a squad of 6. The squad leader, appointed by the commandant himself, was Corporal E. Vasquez. They stared at the paper in silence. One of them, the youngest, made a joke. Nobody laughed. Something in the air of Fort Bremen had already begun to change, and they could feel it, even if they could not yet name it. The field training exercise was called Operation Ironback, and it began on a Tuesday night under a moon the color of bone. Elena assembled her squad at the edge of the woods, 6 cadets in full combat gear, rifles loaded with training rounds, packs weighing 40 pounds each. She did not yell. She did not insult them. She spoke in the same soft, level voice she had used in the mess hall, and that quietness was somehow more unsettling than any shouting would have been. She told them the mission. They were to navigate 12 miles of hostile terrain, locate and secure 3 checkpoints, and return before dawn. Failure meant repeating the exercise every night for a week. Success meant a full day's rest. She told them that in her squad, there were only 2 rules. The first rule was that nobody got left behind. The second rule was that whoever complained first carried the radio, and the radio weighed 18 pounds. Harrison Brooks smirked. Within the first mile, he was carrying the radio. Within the first 3 miles, he was no longer smirking. Elena set a pace that was not impossible, but was relentless, the kind of pace a soldier learns in mountain country, where stopping means freezing and slowing means dying. She moved with the quiet economy of someone who had done this for real, and the cadets, who had only ever done it in drills, began to understand by the fifth mile that they were not on a training exercise with a small woman. They were on a training exercise with a combat veteran who had simply chosen, until now, not to show them who she was. At the second checkpoint, one of the cadets, a thin boy named Dylan, rolled his ankle on a hidden route and went down hard. The old Harrison would have kept moving. The new Harrison, the one who had been carrying the radio for 4 hours, found himself dropping to his knees beside Dylan without thinking. Elena knelt on the other side. She taped the ankle with the quick, practiced hands of a medic. She told Dylan he was going to walk the rest of the way, and she told Harrison he was going to walk beside him. And then, without raising her voice, she said the sentence that would stay with Harrison Brooks for the rest of his career. She said, "A leader is not the person who never falls. A leader is the person who picks up the one who did." They reached the third checkpoint 40 minutes before dawn. They returned to base as the sun rose over the tree line. Every cadet in the squad was still on his feet. Every cadet in the squad had, somewhere in those 12 miles, carried someone else's weight. Elena dismissed them without ceremony. She went to her bunk, took off her boots, and slept for 3 hours. And when Harrison Brooks lay down in his own bunk and closed his eyes, he discovered, to his surprise, that he was crying, and he could not have told anyone why. Over the next 10 days, Operation Ironback turned into something the cadets of Fort Bremen would talk about for years. Elena ran her squad through every exercise the academy had to offer, and then she ran them through exercises she invented on the spot. Exercises that had nothing to do with passing tests and everything to do with becoming the kind of people who could be trusted with other people's lives. She made them stand in the rain and recite the names of every soldier in their family tree who had ever served. She made them carry each other, blindfolded, across a river in the dark, so that they would learn what it felt like to be completely dependent on the person whose wrist they had once twisted. She taught them how to disassemble a rifle in under 30 seconds, and she taught them, more importantly, why a rifle is only ever as good as the conscience of the person holding it. On the 7th night, around a small fire in the woods during a rest break, Harrison Brooks finally asked her the question he had been holding in his throat for a week. He asked her why she had not broken his wrist in the mess hall. Elena looked at him across the fire for a long time before she answered. She said that she had considered it. She said that she had chosen not to, because breaking his wrist would have ended his career, and ending his career would have made him into a victim, and she had not come to Bremen to make victims. She had come to make officers. She said that the hardest discipline a soldier ever learns is the discipline of not using the power she has. Harrison nodded slowly. He did not speak again that night. But the next morning, he walked to the barracks of the 3 female cadets who had washed out earlier that year, and he wrote each of them a letter of apology in his own handwriting. And he mailed them from the post office on base with his own money, and he did not tell anyone he had done it. Elena found out anyway, because small posts have no secrets, and when she found out, she said nothing to Harrison. She simply added a small star beside his name in her green notebook. By the end of the 2nd week, the squad that had started Operation Ironback as a group of entitled boys and frightened strangers had become something else. They ate together. They trained together. They covered for each other on the obstacle course. When a new female cadet arrived at Bremen on the 14th day, stepping off the bus in the same gray drizzle that had greeted Elena, it was Harrison Brooks who walked out to meet her, took her duffel bag off her shoulder, and carried it to the barracks for her. Elena watched from the window of the administration building. Colonel Hayes stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The old culture of Fort Bremen was not dead yet, but for the first time in a long time, it had a crack in it, and the light was getting in. The final test of Operation Ironback came on a Friday in late October, on a live training field at 2 in the morning, under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had tipped over a bucket of salt. The exercise was called Night Extraction, and it simulated a downed helicopter in hostile territory. The squad had to locate the wreck, secure the pilot, and exfiltrate under simulated enemy fire before first light. It was the hardest exercise in the Bremen curriculum, and it had a 90% failure rate. Elena briefed her squad in the staging area. She looked each of them in the eye. She told them that she trusted them. And then, for the first time since she had arrived at Bremen, she told them her real story. She told them about the Hindu Kush. She told them about the sniper. She told them about the 18-year-old private she had carried on her back for 3 miles through a mountain pass with a bullet in her own hip, and how that boy had lived because her squad had refused to leave him. She told them that every rule she had taught them in the last 2 weeks was a rule that someone had died to write. And then she said, "Let's go." They found the simulated wreck 40 minutes in. They found the simulated pilot, a weighted dummy, pinned beneath a beam. They heard the simulated enemy fire, pyrotechnics rigged in the trees, and they ran, and they ran, and they ran, for cadets and one corporal carrying a 200-pound dummy between them. Lungs burning, legs shaking, Harrison Brooks out in front calling cadence in a voice that cracked but did not stop. They crossed the extraction line at 4:17 in the morning, 6 minutes under the pass time. The first squad in 3 years to complete night extraction on the first attempt. The drill sergeant who met them at the line was a gray-haired man named Master Sergeant Doyle, who had seen 40 years of cadets come and go, and who was famously incapable of being impressed. He looked at the squad. He looked at the dummy. He looked at Elena. And then, very quietly, he took off his own patrol cap and held it against his chest in the old salute of respect, the one soldiers give only to the dead and to the extraordinary. The squad stood at attention in the starlight, breathing hard, and none of them, not even Harrison, realized they were crying until the sergeant told them to stand easy and their shoulders began to shake. They had been running for their lives, in a sense, for 2 weeks. Not from an enemy, from the people they used to be. And they had finally outrun them. Corporal Elena Vasquez received her instructor certification the following Monday, signed by Colonel Hayes in blue ink, as promised. She stayed at Fort Bremen for 4 more years, and in those 4 years the washout rate for female cadets at the academy dropped from the highest in the training command to the lowest. Harrison Brooks graduated at the top of his class. He went on to command a mixed infantry platoon in 2 different theaters, and he never, in his entire career, raised his voice at a soldier under his command. The 3 other cadets who had carried Elena to that lunch table on her first night all finished their training, and all 3 of them, when asked years later to name the person who had most shaped them as officers, gave the same answer without hesitation. What Elena's story teaches us is not that she was stronger than the men who tried to humiliate her, though she was. It is not that she was smarter than them, though she was that too. It is that real strength, the kind that changes institutions and saves lives, almost never looks the way we expect it to look. It is quiet. It is patient. It refuses to use the power it has until the moment using that power will build something instead of break something. It carries the radio when no one else will. It kneels beside the one who fell. It writes the letter of apology no one asked for. It remembers the name of every soldier who came before. Elena was laid down on a lunch table on her first night at Fort Bremen, and she chose, in that moment, not to destroy the boys who put her there. She chose to teach them instead. And that choice is the difference between a soldier and a leader, between a warrior and a guardian, between the person who wins a fight and the person who wins one. If her story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and tell me in the comments, who was the Elena in your life?